We have a dedicated group of ladies here at St. Denis who, during the growing season, spend countless hours taking care of all of our landscaping, the plants, the bushes, trying to make our property look as attractive as it can. And of course, they have to spend a lot of time pruning, weeding, watering, nurturing, doing everything they can. And any of you who have tried to grow flowers or vegetables or anything like that know that you can't just throw them in the ground and leave them alone, but you have to care for them constantly. And Jesus uses that image for us to talk about ourselves and our relationship with him. We cannot just be baptized and say, oh, that's it, I'm baptized and I go to church on Sunday, whatever, and just leave it at that. But we must be constantly working on our faith, pruning away anything in our life that does not bear fruit for the Lord, anything that would be like a sucker branch. Gardeners, especially vintners, those who grow grapes, know how often they must do that. Every single branch that does not have a cluster of grapes on it is taking energy away from the production of the grapes. And they have to do it constantly and repeatedly to make sure they can produce the finest grapes, because from that they get the greatest and the best of wine. And if you're not into wine, roses, people who grow prize roses for contests and things, know they have to do the same thing. Have to cut off any of the branches that do not produce or are not nurturing the flower. And even if there are smaller buds that are not going to really amount to anything, they have to prune those back to make sure you get that one beautiful rose. And Jesus is trying to do that in our lives as well. We need to be forever working at our faith and pruning away everything in us that is not bearing fruit for the Lord. And that's a constant battle, to look in our lives and say, the things I'm giving attention to that seem to be the most important to me, are they things that are bearing fruit for Christ? Or am I giving attention to things that are sucking away the strength that should be going to my following Christ? And that's something that we do throughout our lives. Children receive it routinely from their parents, their teachers, everybody. Daily, they're receiving correction and reminders from people, no, you must not do that, stop that, cut that out, whatever it may be. And that's the pruning process that parents and teachers are doing precisely to help them grow to be the best they can be. As adults, when we often don't have somebody like that, well, we have to take it over on ourselves or take it on ourselves. And we have to be the ones looking at our lives and saying, what's keeping me from being the best I can be? And prayerfully bring it before the Lord and say, cut back those areas in my life, Lord, that are keeping me from serving you to the best of my ability. And just like we have to do that, so the church has had to do that as an institution over 2,000 years. The earliest days of the church, there was massive pruning going on, because these were the days that we talk about the terrible heresies, all the different false beliefs about Jesus, as the church tried to grapple with what is it precisely that we believe about Jesus. And many of those heresies were fought over with absolute violence, even by some of the bishops and the adherents to it. There were some that didn't believe that Jesus was truly God, others that didn't believe that Jesus was truly man, and all sorts of other things revolving around that. And it took a long time for the church to actually be able to make clear decisions on those and teach us what it is that in fact we believe in the Lord. So the church has had to prune over different times. When there were times in the Middle Ages, for example, when or the Renaissance, that sadly led up to the Reformation, when there were priests and bishops, even some popes, who were living lives that were not in keeping with the way that they were supposed to live, not living the moral lives that they should have been living. It led, of course, to a good portion of the Reformation. And then the church had to have the Counter-Reformation and the Council of Trent to prune away all of the bad stuff and put us back on a stable foundation. And thankfully, it worked. And in our own day, we've seen a pruning going on in the church. And Pope Benedict XVI spoke about it. In fact, it's sometimes referred to as the Benedict effect. Many of us who are older can remember years back when the churches were packed on Sunday. And 75% of Catholics came to church on Sunday. Now, of course, it's the reverse. 75% of Catholics don't come to church on Sunday. And among many of our Protestant brothers and sisters and other religions, it's even lower. It's a time where our society in general does not feel a need for organized worship. Many people believe in God, but they want a one-on-one relationship with him, and rather than coming to a church and worshiping together. That would be a topic for another time as to why that is not tenable and that is not healthy. But nevertheless, we lament the days when the churches were full. And now we say, look how the numbers are dropping and smaller numbers of people coming. And that's certainly something to be concerned with. But it may not be as idealized or the past as we sometimes imagine it being. Yes, our churches may have been packed, but there's a lot of evidence that they may have been packed with people, but not really with disciples. Not with people who were trying to follow the Lord Jesus faithfully each and every day of their life. And we certainly know of some that were there that seemed to be present at church on Sunday only because they were afraid not to be there, because they knew it was a mortal sin if they didn't attend church, and so they did it just to make sure God couldn't tell them they sinned. And that led to a lot of people asking, how late can I show up and how early can I leave and still have heard Mass, so have met my obligation before the Lord? And that's led to a lot of people who would just, even to this day, we find some that say, well, as long as I'm there by the gospel, I'm okay. And others who would leave right after communion saying, well, I spent enough time there, I haven't sinned. Well, try that in a relationship. Imagine a man and a woman who are dating or fiancés. And imagine if one said to the other, honey, what's the minimum amount of time that I can spend with you today that will make you pleased with me and not be upset? If somebody even said that to you, I think that relationship would be ended immediately. We would never do that with somebody we're dating. Well, then why do we try to do that with God and say, God, what's the least amount of time that I can spend with you? People who are forever saying, we got to make the Mass shorter. The Mass has to be shorter. Why? Why do we have to cut down on the time that we spend in Mass? And many people who do that, then they go out and become Jehovah's Witnesses, where they spend over 2 hours on a Sunday worshiping there and are assessed 10% of their income, and they give it freely. Why would they be willing to do it there and not here as Catholics? So a lot of people were not necessarily disciples of Jesus, and there were so many other things that brought evidence of that. I remember as a kid or a teenager, my parish had done something that many parishes were doing, but what came to a halt very quickly, and that was at the Prayer of the Faithful, opening up to people to offer the things they wanted to pray for. And I'll never forget one Mass I was at where a woman got up and went on this long statement about that the church will understand the needs of women and allow abortion and birth control and all this other stuff. And she really got into a preaching moment on that. And it was very hard for the priest to try to stop her and politely try to end that petition that obviously was contradictory to what we believe. And after that, my parish never allowed that ever again. And I probably am sure in many other places they had similar things and decided, no, we'll write them out beforehand. So we saw some of that, and even when I was newly ordained, if you even remotely talked about any of the hot topic issues of the day, after Mass you'd have a barrage of people coming at you, angrily giving you both barrels of the gun. How dare you preach about that? Whether it was abortion or whatever the issue, that was clearly a church teaching, but these people were saying, no, the church is wrong in that teaching, and we're fighting to get the church to change that. And you keep talking about it, and as if somehow we were spiting them or slighting their efforts to change the church. And of course, we had to remind them that the church is not changing eternal truths. What God reveals to us through the church is the truth of Christ. It's not left up to the opinion of people and to a popular vote. And of course, then when some people who realized that the church finally was not going to change our teachings, that were remaining firm, well, they left. And there were some people who wanted us to change the teaching then and saying, well, people are voting with their feet. They don't like these teachings. So therefore, the church is going to have to change, and get more popular, more relevant with the world. And a church that tries to be relevant with the world, saying what is popular, has lost her teaching authority and has lost all credibility as somebody leading the world to Christ. It is not the world teaching the church. It is the church teaching the world. And so with a heavy heart, we had to let those people go. And we remember what Jesus did when he gave the great discourse on the bread of life in Capernaum, where he said, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life within you. For my flesh is true food and my blood true drink. And a lot of people said, this is crazy, and would no longer follow him. How did Jesus respond? Did he go after them and say, all right, you don't like that? Okay, well, come back, I'll change that. I'll get rid of this Eucharist thing if you don't like it. Just tell me what you want as long as you stay with me. Well, of course not. With a heavy heart, he let them go. They were not ready to follow him. They were not ready to make that commitment. They were not ready to prune themselves of anything that kept them from bearing fruit for him. And so we remain fast as somebody teaching the truth of Christ, whether it is popular or not, and reminding people that we need to prune ourselves constantly in order to be able to bear witness to the Lord. And there is hope out there, actually. There are signs that this pruning effect is working. One of the things that we might lament the most that we've lost over these past 40, 50 years is the religious orders and the predominance that we had of them, most particularly the women religious, the sisters who staffed our schools and who, by being dedicated teachers in the schools, kept tuition very low, and so more and more Catholic families could afford a Catholic education for their children in the parish school. But then as the sisters disappeared and we had to hire lay people, well, lay people had families to support. So we had to give them a larger salary, and that meant tuition had to be raised. And of course, more and more people then could no longer afford a Catholic education. And we've suffered from that and lamented and say, what could we do to get the sisters back? And what happened that they disappeared? Well, there's no one answer for it all. Many different things that happened to make the women religious decide to leave the order, and many of them did just that. They just decided to leave and cease being religious sisters. One of the big ones that hit many of them, thankfully not all religious orders, some of them did beautifully, but a lot of them, the women religious especially, were hit by or bitten by the women's lib bug. And they decided they no longer wanted to be handmaids of the Lord, but they wanted to be liberated women, and take their place in the world, doing all the things that men are doing. And I don't mean for a moment to cast any judgment, positive or negative, on women's lib. Okay, that's not the point. But one of the things in the sisters doing that, they may have felt that was good for them, but I don't think they realized that they cut off their future. Because think about it. What young girl today who wants to become a liberated woman of the world is going to become a religious sister to do that? No, there's many other opportunities open for them. And they forgot that the difference is the difference, even in the priesthood. I remember in high school, a priest coming and talking to us about the priesthood, and it was in the back of my mind at the time. I wasn't closed to the idea, but I remember his whole talk. There wasn't anything in the talk about the positive things about what it means to be a priest, the beautiful gifts of the priesthood, representing Christ, letting Christ work through you, the joy and the glory of celebrating Mass, of hearing confessions, of anointing people, of everything that we do on a daily basis as priests. All he talked about was, well, my life isn't all that much different from yours. I get to go on vacation. I have a car. Yeah, and people were asking questions. Yeah, I have a stereo. I can listen to music. And in all of that, I remember feeling like, well, if your life is not all that much different from mine, then why should I join you? We forgot the difference is the difference. And priests who were getting to the point where people would say, Father, take your collar off, put a flannel shirt on, don't use the title Father, let us call you by your first name, and come to the bar with us and have drinks, and this way you can be relevant, you can relate to us. But it's almost as if they were saying they wanted a priest to relate to them in spite of the fact that he was a priest, rather than because of the fact that he was a priest. So when we'd lost our way in the religious life and the priesthood, well, we needed to be pruned back and hope that a new life would come from that. And we are seeing signs of it. This past Thursday, I was down visiting with my parents who live in Suffern. And in Suffern is the mother house of the Sisters of Life, who were founded by Cardinal O'Connor in the 80s. And these sisters still wear their religious habit, still use their religious names, and their numbers are blooming. They are building additions and extra homes all over the country and even in other parts of the world to accommodate all the young ladies who are going after them, trying to or wanting to be members of the Sisters of Life. And these sisters are faithful to the Lord. They love the church. They love Christ. They love the gospel. They're bearing great fruit for him. They make people feel beautiful about yourself just being in their presence. And there is nothing negative anyone could say about them. These sisters command respect just by the life they're living. And people might look at them and say, wow, look at all these young women who are willing to live a different way. There must be something to that. Also, on Thursday, I got a phone call from a young man that I've been sponsoring for several years now who works with Focus. If you're familiar with Focus, they're a group of young people who go to college campuses, Catholic and lay, as missionaries, or Catholic and secular as missionaries, and who just work with the young people. They're trying to bring them around to the gospel. And they've been having great success. In fact, he mentioned that since they've begun, they have led over 700 young people to discern religious life and the priesthood just by their working among them. So that's a hope-filled sign. Here at St. Denis, we're noticing our numbers are up. We're up about an average of 50 people more this year than we were this time last year. So there is a hope. There is something going that maybe the pruning effect that we're in the middle of is taking effect. I'm certain that as Pope Benedict had said, well, we may have smaller numbers of people, but we have smaller, dedicated numbers of people. And that you, the good people here at St. Denis, I know that you would not be here if you were not trying to be disciples of Jesus. So our numbers may be smaller, but we're more dedicated. And hopefully from that, our dedication, that we will not be afraid to bring out to others and lead them to Christ and help prune them and make more and more people bear great fruit for Christ. And so, my friends, do not be afraid of the pruning in the church that's going on, and do not be afraid of the pruning that we must do in our own lives. Sometimes it may feel painful, some of the things we have to get rid of in order to give our attention to the Lord and not to other things. But the Lord challenges us to do that so that we can bear fruit for him, fruit for eternal life. May Jesus Christ be praised, now and forever.